Let's dive into a really chilling mystery, shall we?
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating one. You gave us some incredible source material here.
Yeah, it's
Everything from the historical context to the
mhm.
victims to the investigation to the media frenzy and this whole, lasting legacy that the Ripper has.
Absolutely.
I mean, even over a century later, it's got this power to just fascinate and just terrify us, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. And I think what makes this case so captivating is that it's so much more than just a true crime story. I mean, it really is a window into Victorian society, all its anxieties and its limitations, and how this single event, really shaped the way we understand crime
Yeah.
and justice even today.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
let's transport ourselves back, shall we?
Okay.
Back to 1888 to the Whitechapel district of London's East End.
Right.
Now, this was no ordinary neighborhood, was it?
Not at all. I want you to imagine, if you will, a place that is so overcrowded that thousands of people are forced to live in just absolute squalor.
Yeah.
Disease is rampant. Violence is commonplace.
Right.
For many women, prostitution was a desperate means of survival.
It's hard to fathom the desperation, especially when you look at the source material, and it points out that over half the children in the East End didn't even reach the age of 5.
Yeah, it paints a very, very grim picture, doesn't it?
It does.
Um, and this desperation, coupled with an influx of immigrants and all this social tension that was already simmering beneath the surface, it really created this breeding ground for fear and unrest.
So into this already volatile mix
Right.
enters Jack the Ripper. I mean, talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Precisely. I mean, the Ripper's crimes really preyed on this existing fear, turning Whitechapel, which was already perceived as this den of vice, into a real-life nightmare.
Yeah, it's almost like the setting itself was a character in this macabre story.
In many ways, it was. And speaking of characters, let's talk about the Ripper's victims.
Uh-huh.
While the exact number is still debated to this day.
Right.
We're going to focus on what we call the canonical 5, the women whose murders are most closely linked to Jack.
Okay.
And what's intriguing here is that these weren't just random targets. The victims were all women who, due to their circumstances, were incredibly vulnerable.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. So we have Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, all brutally murdered, their throats slashed.
Yep.
But what I found really chilling was just the brutality seemed to escalate with each victim.
Yeah. Yes, there's this clear progression of violence that you see from the initial killings to the later more, frenzied attacks. And it raises this question: was the killer growing bolder, more confident, or maybe even more deranged as time went on?
And the detail in the source material is just, it's hard to even imagine. Chapman's intestines placed over her shoulder, Eddowes' earlobe found in her clothing, and Kelly, her body was described as being hacked beyond all recognition. I mean, it's horrific.
It is, and the level of mutilation, it points to something that goes beyond just, a need to kill. It suggests a deeper psychological disturbance, this fascination with the act itself.
Yeah.
And possibly even this desire to just completely dehumanize the victims.
It begs the question, why were some victims more mutilated than others?
Right.
Was there a specific pattern?
Yeah.
Some kind of ritualistic element that we're missing? It's like we're trying to decipher a code, a twisted code.
And that's part of what makes this case so fascinating and so frustrating at the same time.
Right.
We have these clues, these pieces of the puzzle, but the picture remains incomplete.
Yeah. And speaking of puzzles, I mean, the police investigation was massive, wasn't it?
It was. It was a massive undertaking.
Thousands interviewed.
Yeah.
Suspects identified, but Jack just always managed to slip through their grasp. It's almost like he was a phantom, a figment of everyone's darkest fears.
Think about the challenges they faced. I mean, no DNA testing,
Right.
no fingerprinting, not even proper crime scene photography. I mean, they were working with such limited tools, relying heavily on eyewitness accounts, which, as we know, can be notoriously unreliable.
And yet they did employ some surprisingly innovative methods.
Yes.
They considered butchers and surgeons as suspects because of the precision of the mutilations, which in a way, that's a very early form of profiling, isn't it?
Right. They were trying to understand the killer's mind, his skill set, his motives. And this is where This whole leather apron scare comes in.
Yeah.
This local Jewish man becomes a prime suspect, fueling, the already existing anti-Semitism in the area. It's a prime example of how, these social biases, especially during times of fear and uncertainty, can really derail an investigation.
It's a reminder that sometimes the need for answers, the need for a scapegoat, can really overshadow the pursuit of the truth. So even though the police were using some, what we would consider today to be innovative methods, the social context really played a part in how this investigation unfolded, didn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But there were genuine breakthroughs, too. Take, for example, Dr. Thomas Bond, the police surgeon.
Right.
His profile of the Ripper, based on, the victims and the crime scenes,
Yeah.
it was rudimentary by today's standards, but it marked this pivotal step towards really understanding criminal behavior.
He described the killer as a solitary man, possibly prone to periodical attacks of homicidal and erotic mania.
It's chilling to think that even back then they were able to glean these kinds of insights.
What's fascinating is that, Bond's profile, despite all its limitations, really laid the groundwork for the field of criminal profiling as we know it today.
Yeah.
It was a recognition that the way a crime is committed can actually tell us something about the mind of the criminal.
And in a case as baffling as this,
Any insight was crucial. But even with all that effort, the case remained unsolved. It's almost as if he vanished into thin air.
and maybe that's part of what fuels our fascination to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, the lack of resolution, the unanswered questions, they leave a void that our imaginations just try to fill.
Speaking of filling voids, let's talk about the letters. Hundreds of them claiming to be from Jack himself. They flooded the police and the newspapers. It makes you wonder, in a world before social media and the internet and all that, how did these letters really shape the public's perception of the case?
Well, it was a media frenzy unlike anything that had been seen before.
Right.
The Ripper became an absolute sensation. His every supposed word just dissected and debated. It's fascinating to consider how the letters, genuine or not, really became part of this whole narrative.
Yeah.
Blurring the lines between fact and fiction.
And the source material highlights 3 letters in particular. The Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the From Hell letter. These weren't just, your run-of-the-mill ramblings.
Right.
Each one of these letters added a whole new layer of intrigue to the case.
Absolutely.
The Dear Boss letter, for example, was the first to use the name Jack the Ripper. Imagine the impact of that. A name coined by the supposed killer himself
Yeah.
that would forever become synonymous with terror.
And then you've got the Saucy Jackie postcard, which was postmarked before the murders were even widely known.
Right.
Now, whether it was a hoax or not, the timing is just incredibly suspect, isn't it? It's like someone was really trying to insert themselves into this narrative to become a part of this whole spectacle.
It raises so many questions. I mean, were they simply trying to capitalize on the fear?
Right.
Or was there a darker motive at play here?
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the From Hell letter. This one arrived with a particularly gruesome package. Half a human kidney. I mean, that just takes things to a whole new level of disturbing, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The From Hell letter, even if it was a hoax, is this chilling reminder of the power of the written word to evoke fear and fascination. It's a reminder that the Ripper case wasn't just about, the physical violence. It was also this psychological game, this battle for control over the narrative.
A battle that, in many ways, continues to this day. The letters, like the case itself, just leave us with more questions than answers. Who wrote them? What were their motives? And maybe the most intriguing question of all, what can they tell us, if anything, about the mind of Jack the Ripper?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, the letters offer these tantalizing glimpses, these possible clues to the killer's psyche, but separating truth from fabrication is an almost impossible task.
It's like trying to catch a ghost.
Yeah.
But even if we can't definitively prove their authenticity, the letters still hold immense value. They give us insight into the social climate, the media landscape, the public's fascination with the macabre.
Right.
And that in itself is a fascinating story.
It is. It's incredible to think, how those letters would have reached just every corner of society, spread through the newspapers. Makes you wonder about the ripple effect,
Yeah.
How this fear would just seep into everyday life for the people of Whitechapel.
Yeah, the source material paints a really vivid picture of that, doesn't it?
Yes.
Imagine yourself walking through Whitechapel at night. The gas lamps casting those long, eerie shadows, the fog rolling in from the Thames.
Right.
Every corner you turn, every stranger that passes you, could be hiding the face of Jack the Ripper. That feeling of dread, I mean, it must have been palpable.
Absolutely. I mean, women were afraid to walk alone at night. Suspicion just clouded every interaction. You can really sense, the erosion of trust,
Yeah.
that fear that just seeped into the very fabric of the community.
And this wasn't just paranoia. I
No,
mean,
no.
businesses suffered. People stayed indoors. I mean, the social dynamics of the entire area were just completely disrupted.
Yeah.
The Ripper's reign of terror had a very real and lasting impact, didn't it?
It did. And it also really exposed the deep inequalities that already existed. I mean, the murders brought the plight of the poor and the marginalized into sharp focus,
Right.
revealing the squalor, the lack of basic services, the desperation that made these women so vulnerable in the first place.
It's like the Ripper's crimes, as horrific as they were, became a catalyst for social change in a way.
Yeah.
The source material mentions the formation of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee,
Mm-hmm.
this group of citizens that took it upon themselves to patrol the streets. I mean, they were frustrated with the lack of progress in the investigation.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
How fear, on the one hand, can be so paralyzing, but on the other hand, can really ignite action.
Right.
And these citizens, they felt so let down by the authorities that they took matters into their own hands.
Right.
It really speaks volumes about the level of anxiety
Yeah.
and that desperate need for some sense of control.
So while the Ripper sowed this terror, he also, unintentionally of course, spurred a community response.
Right.
It's a complex and somewhat paradoxical legacy, isn't
It
it?
really is. And that complexity kind of extends beyond Whitechapel, too. I mean, think about the impact on law enforcement.
Yeah.
This case pushed them to develop new techniques, to think differently about criminal behavior. Dr. Bond's profile, as basic as it was a groundbreaking step towards the criminal profiling that we see today.
Yeah, the Ripper, in a way, really forced law enforcement to evolve. They had to adapt.
They did.
To find new ways to understand and catch these kinds of criminals.
Right.
It's a dark legacy, but an undeniably significant one, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it goes even further than that. I mean, this case became a media sensation, didn't it? I mean, think about the impact on journalism, on the public's appetite for true crime. Jack the Ripper became a household name.
Right.
This figure of both horror and fascination.
And that fascination has not waned, has it?
Not at all.
I mean, we're still talking about him today.
Yeah.
We're still trying to unravel this mystery, over a century later.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about this case that just captures the imagination, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the unsolved mystery is a big part of it, As humans, we are drawn to puzzles, to the challenge of trying to solve the unsolvable.
Right.
And then there's the brutality of the crimes, the darkness that it reveals about human nature.
Yeah.
It's this morbid curiosity, perhaps, but it's undeniable.
It is.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder.
Yeah.
What would drive someone to commit such horrific acts?
Right.
The source material touches on various psychological theories,
It does.
hatred of women, a need for power and control, even satiriosis, this uncontrollable sex drive.
It's important to note, though, that while these theories are, intriguing and they're definitely worth exploring, none of them fully explain the complexity of this case. I mean,
No.
was it purely about sexual gratification?
Yeah.
Or was there a deeper psychological motivation,
Yeah.
A desire to inflict pain, to exert dominance?
Yeah, it's like we're trying to piece together this shattered psyche, but some of the pieces are missing.
Mm.
And we may never have that complete picture.
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can analyze the evidence,
Yeah.
consider the historical context, explore all these different psychological theories, but ultimately we're left with an enigma.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's what keeps us coming back, trying to make sense of the senseless.
It's a reminder that sometimes, even with all our knowledge and advancements, some mysteries may never be fully solved.
And that leads us to another layer of the Ripper's legacy, this endless speculation about his identity. I mean, over the years, hundreds of suspects have been proposed,
I know.
ranging from, butchers and barbers to doctors and even members of the royal family.
It's like everyone wants to find a face to put to this monster,
Right.
to make sense of the chaos that he unleashed.
Exactly.
But with so many theories, so much misinformation out there, how do we separate fact from fiction?
Well, that's the challenge for any historian or researcher that really dives into this case.
Right.
We have to approach the evidence critically, be aware of the biases of the time, and just acknowledge that some questions may simply remain unanswered.
And maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the mystery itself is part of what makes the Ripper so enduring.
It could be.
It allows us to project our own fears, our own interpretations onto the narrative, doesn't it?
It does. It becomes a reflection of ourselves,
Yeah.
of our, our fascination with the dark side of humanity. And that's a powerful thing, It forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths, to acknowledge that evil can exist in unexpected places.
So as we delve deeper into the psychology of Jack the Ripper, we're also delving deeper into ourselves, aren't we? It's a journey that's both unsettling and strangely compelling.
Yeah.
But I think it's a journey worth taking if it helps us to better understand the complexities of human nature.
Exactly, because by understanding the darkness, we can hopefully shed some light on the paths that lead us away from it, and maybe that's the most valuable takeaway from this entire deep dive.
It is a sobering thought,
Yeah.
but a necessary one. And
Yeah.
it makes you realize that the Ripper's legacy extends far beyond the cobbled streets of Whitechapel.
Ah,
I mean, it's a story that continues to resonate with us,
it does.
challenging us to confront our own fears and grapple with this enduring mystery of evil.
Absolutely.
As we've been discussing the Ripper and his psychology and the social context, it's easy to get kind of caught up in the theories and the speculation and all that.
Right.
But I think it's really crucial to remember that this wasn't just some abstract puzzle.
No?
These were real lives,
Yeah.
brutally cut short.
Absolutely. Each of those women had a story, a life, beyond their tragic end. And while we can analyze the patterns and the motives, we must never lose sight of the human cost of these crimes.
And the fear that rippled through Whitechapel,
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine living in that constant state of dread?
It's hard to fathom.
The source material talks about how, women wouldn't dare walk alone after dark.
Right.
Families were just terrified for their daughters and their wives and their sisters.
It's a stark reminder that, the Ripper's impact went far beyond the immediate victims.
Yeah.
He created this climate of fear that just permeated every aspect of life in Whitechapel. Think about that psychological toll it takes on a community.
Right.
That constant feeling of vulnerability,
Yeah.
of being hunted.
It's like the very air was poisoned with fear.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a matter of perception either, was it? The source material mentions how businesses suffered.
No.
People avoided going out. The social fabric of the community was just strained to the breaking point.
Exactly. The Ripper's crimes had a tangible economic impact as well. People were afraid to leave their homes, to go about their daily lives. It's almost as if he managed to just paralyze an entire community with fear.
And that's where the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee comes in, doesn't it?
Right.
These men, ordinary citizens, felt compelled to take action,
Yeah.
to try to restore some sense of order, some sense of protection.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's a fascinating example of how fear, while often debilitating, can also really galvanize people into action.
Right.
They felt so let down by the authorities that they took it upon themselves to patrol the streets, to try to protect their community. It's really a testament to their courage and their resilience.
So while the Ripper sowed this terror, he also, inadvertently of course, sparked a community response.
Right.
It's strange. Kind of an unexpected outcome.
Yeah.
It speaks to the complexities of human nature, doesn't it? How even in the face of unimaginable fear, we can find the strength to fight back, to protect ourselves and those we care about.
It's a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, there are always glimmers of hope, of humanity. And those glimmers are worth remembering, worth cherishing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Jack the Ripper,
Yeah.
what do we take away from it all?
Well, we've explored the social conditions that made these crimes possible. We've delved into, the psychological depths of a killer, examined the ripple effects that continue to this very day.
Right.
But perhaps the most important takeaway is that the Ripper case, for all its darkness and mystery, is ultimately a story about us.
Yeah.
It's a story about our capacity for both good and evil,
Right.
about our vulnerability and our resilience.
It's a story that, despite its age, still has the power to teach us, to challenge us, to make us think differently about the world around us.
Exactly. It reminds us that, the past is never truly past, that it continues to shape our present in ways that we may not even realize. And by understanding those connections, by engaging with history, we can hopefully gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the complexities of the human experience.
So as you continue to ponder this mystery of Jack the Ripper, remember that you're not just unraveling a historical puzzle,
Right.
you're also exploring the depths of human nature,
Yeah.
confronting the shadows that lurk within us all. And perhaps in that exploration, you'll discover something new, something unexpected about yourself.
Because the journey into the past is often a journey into our own hearts and minds.
That's right.
And that's a journey worth taking no matter where it may lead.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.